All righty, we are live. Hello and good evening. My name is Alita, also known as Legal Bites. Welcome this evening. I have with me, as always, Nate the lawyer. Everybody say hi. Nate, say hi to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
So normally we do this live stream with Nate the lawyer and with Uncivil Law. Unfortunately, Uncivil Law will not be able to join us this evening, but I hope everything's okay. So we were just sorry we're a little bit late in starting. We were just talking about our get together this upcoming weekend. So just a reminder to everyone that is in the New York area, if you guys want to meet up with us, we will be getting together on Sunday evening somewhere. Details are still going to be hashed out. We'll probably put them out on Twitter for where to meet up with us if you guys are interested. But otherwise, if you guys are enjoying this, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe and share and do all the fun YouTube-y stuff. So anyway, so we have some interesting topics today that we wanted to cover. Let's jump right into them. Nate, what have you got? You were talking about voter ID laws.
Yeah. So I've been doing a deep dive into this whole the whole madness behind voter ID, and for those of you who don't know, what's been going on is that when you go to the voting station, some states say you got to show a photo ID, and obviously it's a lot of controversy because generally, African Americans and minorities, they're less likely to have photo IDs than their white counterparts, and that fact alone, means it's discrimination. Now, I think the Republicans don't help themselves because they go and I found a whole bunch of clips of Republicans. Yeah, we're gonna win the election thanks to voter IDs. Your intent is pretty much, you're letting me know what your intent is,
Yeah.
But come to find out though, just the history of voter ID laws. Number one, we actually have a national voter ID law in the United States. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yes, it was signed in 2002. If you Wikipedia national voting ID laws, the law comes up. It's called the Help America Vote Again Act, or Help America Vote Act, and it was signed by George W. Bush, and it was a response to the 2000 election. Because remember how the 2000 election was so bad, the hanging chads and all that stuff. Well, that prompted Congress to act because what they found is that all the voting systems were like garbage, right? So what they initiated was a voter ID law at the congressional level. And that voter ID law said that everyone any first-time voters after the law was passed in 2002 had to, one, when they register the vote, they had to show either some form of ID, either a photo ID, a current photo ID, like it says this in the law, or like a utility bill, birth certificate, something like that, just so they can identify who you are, who you say you are, so forth and so forth. And they also had part two, which said, well, if you didn't show ID when you registered, well, then the first time you vote, you had to show ID. So even if you went to, no matter what state you went to, if this was your first time voting in a federal election, you didn't show ID to register, you had to show ID at the polls to actually vote, to identify it was you. And it was the bill passed. Well, I'll ask you this. The passage of the bill, how many senators? Because the Senate was actually 52 Democrats and 49 Republicans. No, 48. 52 Democrats, 48 Republicans. What do you think the breakdown of Democrats to Republicans were?
For the bill? Whether they were for or against?
How many? Well, just guessing. How many senators do you think were for the bill?
I mean, the fact that I don't really know much about it tells me it probably was more bipartisan than we would think.
The bill was passed by veto-proof majorities in both House and Senate. The Senate passed the bill 92-2.
Whoa!
And the two dissenting, it was Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer, both from New York, who were the only two nays on the bill. So it passed unanimously. I'm talking about the most liberal, ideologically, the most liberal Democrats in Congress voted for this national voter ID law, and it's still the law today. And it's interesting because some of the things that Hillary Clinton said in her speech, I actually went to the Congressional Record and found it. Some of the things that she said in her speech, like, that This would disenfranchise black voters, like all the same ills that we hear today. Well, 20 years later, none of that stuff happened. Matter of fact, there's some scholars out there that the two things that we know have happened with this national voter ID law. Number one, black and minority participation in the voting system has actually increased over that time. So, for instance, in 2012, black voter participation actually was higher than white voter participation. I think they said like 67% of registered black voters voted, and something like 65% of white voters. So even better than their white counterparts. And now, but obviously, that was the Obama year, the 2 Obama years. He got overwhelming black support. So even with that, it shows that even after this voter ID law, this is a voter ID law. After this voter ID law was passed and initiated, none of the ills that they said were going to come to pass. So my video just kind of goes through that. I know it was a little long-winded, but it has a lot of context and history. And I don't think a lot of people know that there is a national voter ID law. I think everybody thinks it's place to place, but we actually have a state issue, but we actually have a national voter ID law. Interesting.
I did not realize that.
I think I feel bad because I'm like sitting here like going over my whole thing, but it's like a good run through. I should have pulled up my slide.
Shared your screen. It's a nice little precursor to your video.
No, but it's funny because I always feel like when I do these type of videos, I always feel like I'm learning something new. Yeah. With just with these issues, because I didn't know we had a national voter ID law. I was like, oh my God, that's shocking to me. It was funny because even how some of the states vote, like in Vermont, for instance, which is crazy. The rule is when you go into the polls, you identify yourself. So my name is Nate Brody, and the person looks at a list, and if your name is on that list, you can vote. So I'm like, that's all I gotta do. Get out, John Smith. If your name is on the list, John Smith, sign this piece of paper, they give you a ballot, you go vote.
It's the same thing in California.
And if your name isn't on the list when you come and say, my name is, Jenny May, if it's not on the list, then I can swear my name is Jenny May and I'm in the right district and sign a piece of paper and cast a live ballot.
Yeah.
That is pretty loosey-goosey.
It is a little loosey-goosey. And I've got to say, so I've actually... I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I have volunteered before to work at voting precincts in California. Mm-hmm. And it actually was pretty fun. I actually one time was an inspector in charge of a voting precinct. And actually I wasn't even supposed to, but they just were understaffed. So they pulled me out from another one that I was just like going to be working like my mom was like the inspector of like the precinct that I was supposed to be working at. And then they were like, no, we actually are severely understaffed. And so I kind of just by default ended up like just kind of taking over.
Alita, lead those people to the promised land.
Exactly. But it's funny because it's like everyone that came up. I mean, not everyone would do this, but a large number of people would come up and just automatically hand you their driver's license because they're like, I have to show my driver's license anytime I, buy alcohol. I often, will be asked for my ID if I, give a credit card to make sure that my name on the credit card is actually me. I have to show my ID to fly anywhere. So people are just so used to providing their identification. So then when it comes to something like voting that, a lot of people take very seriously, as they should, then people were just like flabbergasted that we had to be like, no, we're not allowed to ask for that. Like put that away. I can't look at that. Like it was like everyone was just so surprised because they were like, I don't understand. Like why can't you look at this thing? We're like, no, we're not allowed.
So hold on, because that happened to me last time I was here in New York. And it's interesting because so did you guys have the rule where if it's a brand new voter, they had to show their ID? Because that's the law. I haven't looked at California's regulations. I saw it, but I wasn't sure.
So in this last election, I actually was a DC resident. So I don't know how I can ask my family members that are in California. Mm-hmm. But my guess is that if people had already been registered, at least that they didn't need to show their ID. But I know in DC, that was my first time registering in DC. So I had to show, I think I had to show my ID when I showed up because I had registered online. So
interesting. Well, you know what? It's funny. Well, how do you feel about this whole voter ID thing? Because like at the end of the day, for me, like I do understand we want the vote to be secure, but then I understand that there's levels to this thing. I think what Vermont does is ridiculous, right? Come in and my name is Jonathan Smith, and that's ridiculous. Let me see the list. My name is whatever name I want it to be. That's kind of
I'm that guy.
yeah, whatever name's on the list to find it. Or if you get if you just get the name wrong, you can just make up one and send it in. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think that's ridiculous, right? That's left-wing propaganda for them to have that type. That's ridiculous. But then I think on the opposite side, I think having IDs that are free, that are accessible, that easy for people to get. I don't want the whole stupid thing where you need an ID, a photo ID to get a photo ID. Like obviously that's not going to work. Things of that nature, just reasonable stuff. And I think one thing that we know now is that everybody who's registered to vote or who voted in a federal election for the first time after 2002 got an ID. And we know that as of right now, more Black people got into the process than previously. So we know that because they have to show IDs, that's not what's holding everybody back. And there was some of the scholars said that there's actually this reflex reaction where the voter ID laws actually have the opposite effect of what's intended. So the voter ID law, obviously they say more people of color are less likely to have IDs, but they've been finding that when the legislatures go and change the law and the news comes out that they changed the law for this reason, then minorities rush and get IDs, and you have these big movements to get everybody registered. So registration goes up, like what happened in Georgia. This before they changed the law again, but before they had the voter ID law. Let's get everybody registered. We're not going to steal this election. And they had mass registration. Now all these people on the voter rolls, you know what I'm saying, get registered. And it had the opposite effect of suppressing the vote, but actually getting it out. And that's the same thing that's happening in Texas and a couple other states. So, I think, I understand when someone says, hey, we're passing these voter ID laws because we want to suppress the Black vote. I understand that's hell of an intent. It's hard to get over it, right?
Yeah.
But then the actual of how it actually works and if it's really doing the thing it's doing. And is it really something that's worth it, right? I think showing some type of reasonable ID to vote, because it's one of the most sacred things that we do, I think that's reasonable. I don't think just, calling out my name and praying that I'm registered, in this particular town is right. This doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I also want to echo that it really does take a balancing effort to, we have to maintain a balance between, maintaining that people have access to the right to vote, because that is a right that people have to vote. And then on the other hand, ensuring that those votes are actually secure, because you can have an access to vote, but if it's completely insecure, I mean, how, like at the end of the day, that dilutes that right, maybe not in a very obvious way, but, you end up having, fraudulent elections potentially.
You could just have people go around to each precinct, right? And just vote, right? It would be easy. It's easier to like you're saying, to dilute the vote. But here's some question somebody puts. They said that we have to say our registered name and recite our registered address. In New York, that's not what we have to do. You say a name and you sign a piece of paper, and they're supposed to check the signature, but my signature looks nothing like the signature there. And like Alita said, I pulled out my ID this time because the lady couldn't get my last name right. So I pulled out my ID, and it was like I pulled out a gun. No, stop! Those are not allowed here. So you're right. That's New York.
Put that away, sir. We're dignified people.
My name is
We don't
John
do IDs here.
We trust you. It's the honesty.
Oh man. Have they found a fake ballot before?
Yes. Well, not a fake ballot.
I'm sure.
But yes, there's been voter fraud before. But I don't think the scale is a mass scale.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree. And yeah, I know that I have heard of this happening before too in California, where in order to register, like you're supposed to register yourself. I can't remember exactly what it was that happened, but someone came in and they were basically they had requested a ballot for themselves and for someone else that they said that they had authorization for, and then they were like just kind of filling them both out like right in front of the precinct officer, and they were like, you can't do this. And so they were like, oh, okay. And then they just went into the other room and did the same thing. And because there was no ability to enforce it, because the other part of it too is that there's only so much that people volunteering at these precincts can do if they see, certain bad behavior going on. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. People are. Do you have a? Oh, I don't know. I think the person now is asking us to have a conversation. Oh, you said I'm not sure if you're talking about fake ballot. I'm not even sure what this question is.
Yeah,
do you have a link for the fake ballot? I what I do know is that people have committed fraud. There's one in Texas recently where somebody voted for somebody else, that type of thing. But the scale is minimum. So yeah. So what else do we have going on?
So we have, let's see, what else do we have? We have, okay, here's something that was interesting, was that Texas this week, the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, he signed a bill allowing student athletes to profit off of their name, image, and likeness. So this was something that was, that other states have passed before Texas. I think Idaho was the first one. It was like Idaho, Arkansas, maybe a few others. But basically they've now made it so that student athletes can actually profit off of their image that's being used by universities for promotion purposes, used by the NCAA for promotion purposes. Before this, there was just a lot of free IP essentially that was being used by the NCAA and universities that are profiting tons already off of these athletes, and a lot of these athletes, I mean, on the one hand, yes, they are typically getting, scholarships. Oh, Jesus.
No.
Sorry.
That is awesome.
Oh, I know, but not when he's on the keyboard.
They caught you off guard that time because you was in midstream. You was like,
I know. I was like, oh no. Here, I'll keep you here. So Holmes, he wants to talk himself, type away on the keyboard. So I was going to say, God, what was I saying? So before, they were, so a lot of these students, a lot of people have said that, of course a lot of them get scholarships, they get free tuition. So people will say they've already received payment in that respect, but at the same time, a lot of these students, not all of them get full scholarships. Not all of them get scholarships. And if they end up on these teams, their images are used for, however long after maybe even they've graduated. There's a way for them to potentially profit when, maybe they won't go pro after college. So it's a nice way, I think for them to be able to profit off of their hard work and, and off of their school's promotion. So I don't know. What do you think, Nate?
No, I think you're right. I think the schools, well, I don't know if it's free IP because, the ad is that, they're getting a free education. The education costs X amount of dollars, plus room and board and all this national notoriety, because they're playing here. So there is this kind of back and forth, but it is essentially free labor, and now that college sports are $1 billion business, you make as much money as they do in the pros, except the owners don't have to pay the students. And a lot of these schools, their biggest money maker is football, is basketball, is the NCAA tournament. Tuition is doing well, but they get more money if they go to a bowl game than if they if they have the whole student body give another $10. But I don't know. I think it's always good to empower people with their talents to be able to negotiate a fair rate of exchange. And I think that's the monopoly of the NCAA was wrong. and I think it's always going to be wrong, because what they do is they say, nobody can pay anyone, and then students, even though student can go anywhere, but essentially, it's where does the person who's giving the free labor, where do you want to work, right? It's you get to work wherever you want to work. It's like, what? Yeah. No. So I think there should be a better process. I've always thought that it was. I always thought the NCAA. I understand the idea of it, but I always thought it's a monopoly. It's essentially a monopoly on college athletics, but for everyone who doesn't know, the Supreme Court did that case where they said baseball's a sport, so it's not subject to the antitrust laws. So maybe that's the way it goes with the NCAA. But at the end of the day, it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I don't believe Texas is going to be like Massachusetts, where they were letting student athletes unionize. But hopefully we'll get there one day.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to see the differences between the major sports, also with how they are with the power of the players, right? So baseball, I think tends to have a very strong players union, so their pay tends to be really good. I think the NFL doesn't have a very strong players union, if I understand correctly.
Well, they do. They do the baseball players union is the strongest, obviously the oldest. NBA. Yeah. But that's because the baseball players earn more because they play more games, for instance. And I think one of the things with the NFL players union is that it's really only 17 games, and they really can't strike for long periods of time because the average NFL career is 3.5 years. So if you're striking for 1.5 years, your window may have closed.
Yeah.
So it's a little tougher for them to really get. And there's 43 people on the NFL team versus 11 people on the baseball team. And how many people do you have? Well, obviously it's going to be more than 11, but it's just a lot less people. 17 games versus 81 games in the NBA and 162 games. It just football. Yeah. It's going to be harder for football for them to negotiate multi-year deals in football because of just the restraints of time. And it's a more savage sport too. So.
Yeah. So but I mean, it's I've always said that if I have kids that are going to go pro somewhere, I would much rather they go to the MLB than really anywhere else.
Oh yeah. That's where you make all the money. The MLB make all the money. Yeah.
And they're less likely to have. I mean, they get injured too. I mean, it's like how many pitchers are? It's like it almost seems like it's like a regular thing for major league pitchers to get like Tommy John surgery.
Yeah.
Like at some point several years in, and so I mean they do get injured too, but their injuries they seem to have fewer. I want to say like impacts on their overall quality of life. Hang on a second. Hey, sorry, cats.
But I think what you think about the physicalness of the contact sports.
Yes.
Football, obviously, they say it's like putting on a trench coat and running into a garage door X amount of times, every game or something like that. So that obviously you're going to have a lot of more. And then basketball, just the fact when you put bodies flying in the air, you're going to have more injuries because you're putting a lot of stress on knees. You're going to have a lot of injuries. With baseball, it's simple. You really, there's really not a lot of jumping. There's really not a lot of collisions. We're not really bumping into people or things. You swing a bat and a ball, and it's rare that a ball hits a person. But if it does, it's usually localized in a small area. So you're right. I think injuries are going to be a lot less prevalent in baseball. But I don't know, because I know NBA players are starting to get paid a lot too. Like now they're starting to get those, $500 million salaries too, like baseball players. In baseball, what is it? After 10 years, you get the $500 million. We're NFL now, and NBA. I think Steph Curry signed a $250 million contract for 5 years. So essentially they're almost there.
Wow. Hang on, sorry.
Oh, it's all right.
1 second.
Oh, Kate Compton's in the building. What's up, Kate?
All right. Oh, hey. All right. Sorry. The cat got a hold of a rock, and it's like I can hear the scratching. I don't know if you can hear the scratching. But
it's all right. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
I love that cat. That cat is hilarious.
I know he's great. He is. He is the best. He has transformed my husband from a non-cat person into a cat person. Like he absolutely loves this cat.
No, the cat has personality.
He does. He totally does. He does. He has the spirit of Justice Holmes in him.
Justice Holmes.
Oh wait, there's the got it. See?
Oh, he was killing it.
So anyway, that's good stuff. I think ultimately the change to that law, I think it's going to bring some good things to some students that, will now have the ability to make some money that they otherwise, wouldn't have been able to. And, especially for students that may or may not end up going pro afterwards.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Yeah, so that'll be a good thing. So anywho, we can move on to the next topic, which is, we can kind of go back into politics. There was I think this week, a Republican senator introduced a constitutional amendment to ban flag burning. There was a lot of interesting reaction from people on Twitter. I mean, number one, I think the likelihood of this actually passing is a little bit low, because I mean, obviously, it's even for this to pass as a congressional act, I think would be unlikely. But obviously, to pass as a constitutional amendment, there's an even higher burden for them to jump through or jump over in order for it to pass. So I think the likelihood of this passing is pretty slim. But at the same time, I think it's interesting that, that there were some people on Twitter that were like, oh, this is unconstitutional because the Supreme Court has said that, that we can't, that the flag burning is okay. It's a form of expression. It's a protest against the government, which, I mean, people, haven't then taken a step back and thought, oh, well, okay, it's unconstitutional because the Constitution it has said that we have a right to free expression. It doesn't ban anything on anything like this. But if there's a constitutional amendment that actually bans the act, then it's no longer unconstitutional to ban flag burning. So anyway, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, there was a famous case, right, for the 11th Amendment. So people knew before the 11th Amendment, you were able to sue a state as an individual, as a citizen. So you could sue the state. So I can sue the state of Georgia if I feel that Georgia wronged me in federal court. And the states were highly, highly upset at that. So what they did was they said, well, we're going to pass the 11th Amendment saying that you cannot
sue a state.
States. Yeah, sue a state. I forget the name of it.
Sovereign immunity.
Sovereign immunity, yes.
Yeah. Yep.
That's one. And obviously the Dred Scott case was overturned by the 13th Amendment. So
yeah. So and kind of what you're referring to is, I mean, usually most of the Constitution has to do with actually not actually necessarily giving individual rights, but restricting the federal government or the state government in various ways. From doing things to the individual, right? So either restricting Congress, restricting the executive, restricting the judiciary, but there are several amendments that do restrict individuals. So, yes, like you said, the 11th Amendment, that is a restriction on the individual to sue the state unless the state has given permission to sue. So that's why you'll see in any kind of a federal statute that is passed, if it talks about any sort of liability of the state or something like that, it'll actually give specific permission for an individual to sue the state for that. So people talk about Section 1983. That's the Civil Rights Act of 1871. That's usually how people are suing for their civil rights against state actors. So if there's due process rights, et cetera, you're usually suing under that. But there's specific language in there saying you are allowed to sue these individuals or these entities under this law. Otherwise, if there wasn't that language, you wouldn't be able to do anything with that law as an individual.
Because I know there's like a weird little quirk in the law in terms of between the 11th and 14th. If you sue under the 11th, you can't sue under the 11th Amendment for things that are in like Article 1. So the commerce power, for instance, or anything like that. I know you can't sue for anything under Article 1. But I know the 14th Amendment allows you to sue states under what's it called? The enforcement clause of the 14th Amendment. But it's for a very unique set of circumstances. And I think you listed them out. Due process rights is because because remember all those rights from the Constitution get to the states by way of the 14th Amendment through substantive due process. So the enforcement clause on the 14th Amendment allows Congress to say, well, you can sue states now through this enforcement clause of the 14th Amendment. And I know in 1983 is obviously the most famous one. That's the one and you're saying, and it lists everything that you can do. So because essentially states, what the 14th Amendment did would just put a caveat to the 11th Amendment saying you can't sue a state, where you can sue a state if Congress is enforcing the 14th Amendment. And I think the same thing is with the 15th Amendment, right? It gave Congress that ability to enforce the amendment. Yeah.
So, and then obviously the 13th Amendment is another restriction on people's individual activities, that you can't own another human being. So anyway, so this would be, this proposed amendment would be another example of not restricting the government, but actually restricting individuals. That would be an interesting addition to the Constitution. I don't think it's likely to pass, like by any stretch.
It sounds more like a political stunt. And don't get me wrong, I understand where maybe coming from, but at the end of the day, when you start dictating which speech is which speech, and when you start changing the Constitution for trivial things like this, nobody's going to buy it. And I don't think you like you said, you need super majorities in both the House and the Senate, and you can't get a simple majority to pass a budget, let alone a constitutional amendment flag, this flag desecration. Right. It's not happening. And even some of the people on the right are staunch First Amendment, absolutists. You know what I'm saying? So it's just not happening. But it's interesting thoughts. But essentially, what you'll be doing is rewriting the First Amendment. Really, you'll be exempting flag burning from the First Amendment.
Yeah, and First Amendment law right now is already kind of complicated. Like people think that it's relatively straightforward, when they first, think of it, because it's like, oh, I have the freedom to say whatever I want to say. That's not necessarily the case. And First Amendment case law is incredibly, incredibly complex coming out of the Supreme Court, because they've looked at so many different ways that the government might compel speech, different ways that they might restrict speech, different ways that, so that would definitely complicate the First Amendment for sure. But and also on, as another note, so technically the way to properly dispose of an American flag is actually to burn it. There's specific process for it. There's a set of traditions that you need to follow in order to do it properly. But the United States military has a very particular way that they do it in order to properly retire a flag, is how they say it. So I think. Oh yeah. There's it's a very specific set of steps that have to be taken, so that it's done respectfully and with honor and reverence. But yeah. So I think that the intent behind this is probably not to affect those traditions and the ways in order to, because otherwise, what would I don't know, the DOD would have to figure out what to do with every American flag that's, is a little bit tattered and worse for wear then. I
think at that point we're getting too much. You must, can't desecrate the flag. Like now we're getting to totalitarian state. The flag is that. Don't get me wrong. I understand if you're in the military, of course the flag is going to be something special. That's what you're fighting for.
Yes.
It's. But as a private citizen, it's like let them burn, let them do it, let them whatever express, because that's the freedom that you fight for, right?
Yeah.
The freedom that you fight for. Even though, don't get me wrong, I don't agree with burning flags, but they have the right to do it. So be it. God bless them.
Right. So this is interesting. You can take your old flag to the VFW, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and they'll hold a ceremony.
Oh,
I think
nice.
I know that if they still exist, Boy Scouts of America. I know that they filed for bankruptcy recently, but I know that they do flag retirement ceremonies and I'm pretty sure other veteran groups also do the same. So that's interesting that they do that as well. So anywho, so on to the next subject. So antitrust and big tech has been a big topic of interest over the last year or so, increasingly so, and there's been bipartisan criticism of big tech companies like Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon. And so now I think it was just this week, a bipartisan group of House members, they introduced 5 bills targeting these companies to basically create a kind of a massive overhaul of antitrust laws in order to target these companies to try to sort of, I guess, even the playing field. Some of these are likely to be more popular than others, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens here. Nate, did you hear about these bills?
Unmute. All right. No, I haven't heard. My daughter's running around here. No, I haven't heard about these bills, but I think it's interesting because I don't know. I have to read up on them because I do understand the need to get big tech, but I'm trying to figure out, because my biggest issue with big tech is that it's such a moving target. Like if go back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and we talk about Amazon and we're talking about something totally different. Go back 10 years ago, we're talking about Bitcoin. We're talking about a whole different animal, and I do understand, because obviously we're talking there's a hardware component and a software component, the Apples of the world, but then there's this merging between the Apples and the Googles of the world, because Google has both the software with Android and they got the hardware with their Apple, with their Google products, and then obviously the software piece. So I don't know. I'm trying to figure out Section 230 to me, and well, this is antitrust, but even with Section 230, these things are really to protect the little guy from the big guy. Right. But Apple is something that you can't compete with. So I don't know. I would like to get more detail on how they're actually going to overhaul the antitrust law. Yeah. It is interesting to look at this while at the same time, we have the conversation on Section 230 that's also been going on at the same time. It seems like those are two different avenues that lawmakers are trying to are looking at to sort of solve some of these same problems that exist, around these companies and around, the ways that they treat competition, the ways that they treat users, or consumers. And it's interesting to see, whether something like this would mean that they would no longer be pushing for any sort of a reform of Section 230, or, or if that's still on the table for a lot of these folks. So it'll be interesting, but some of these, like I said, I haven't actually looked at the bills themselves, but I have looked at, different, analyses of these bills, just other people that have written up on it. And it looks like, so there's 5 of them total to be voted on by the United States House Judiciary Committee's antitrust panel next week. And so one of them gives like increased funding for
increased funding for antitrust agencies. That seems to be pretty uncontroversial. Then there's another one that gives users the ability to take their digital history to another website, which I think is an interesting concept. I don't know how that would be enforced, how that would be put in place, but I'm sure that's something that would be possible. And it seems like
close to that.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, anytime you're moving data around, there's going to be some kind of a cost, but to give people the ability to tell Facebook, hey, if you don't stop doing this thing, or if you start doing this thing, I'm just going to take my data elsewhere. That's an interesting concept, to sort of give some stock and some power to individuals and to users, that otherwise are just like, well, Facebook owns my stuff. Facebook owns my face. Like there's nothing I can do but close my account. It's
but even if you close your account, they still have all that data on your spending habits, your eating habits, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
but it gives you ownership over the data, which I do like. Gives you ownership over your data.
Yeah. And then, and I wonder too, if that would then impact monetization of that data, if that would give individual users control over the monetization, to say like, hey, yeah, I will take, advertising, for like, I will individually sell my data, to advertisers, for this thing, and or I'll sell a piece to Facebook so that they can use it for advertising for a period of time or something, like I wouldn't be surprised if that would turn into some sort of a secondary market, of, over this data. So for advertising revenues and stuff.
Well, but wouldn't it, because if I was Facebook, even if they passed the law, unless they passed it where it couldn't be waived, right? I would say, well, if you want to use Facebook, you have to waive the right to remove the data, and that would be like part of the conditions and terms of using Facebook. Like, I think there would be a way that would be the way that I would get around it. They have to do this or do that. I would try. And then even if they do make it mandatory, the fact of the matter is the data is only valuable because it's valuable to both sides too. It's valuable for me in the sense of I actually want targeted ads. I don't want to see ads for things I don't want to buy. I want to see ads for things that I might likely want to buy. Things that are interesting to me. The last time I used hemorrhoid cream, right, was never. You know what I'm saying? I just don't need it. I haven't even looked for it. The fact that I said it now, it's going to probably come up on the screen, like, hey, preparation 8. It's like, I said it on the screen.
It'll come up on my screen now too.
But that's what I'm saying. But so there's a benefit to both sides.
Yeah.
But I do like the fact that, because I don't think they'll have enough money to pay everybody for those type of ads. I think they'll probably just make it an option for some people like me who don't mind it, but then some people who say, hey, I want to take control of which I think is fair. And I do think it's interesting, but I like it. I like what I'm hearing. I'll say that.
Yeah. So that one I think is interesting. There's definitely going to be some pushback from Facebook on that one. Maybe Twitter and others as well. Let's see. Another one says that it makes it illegal for one monopoly to own another business that relies heavily on the first. Oh, so for example, for like Google to own Facebook, or sorry, for Google to own YouTube, for example. So YouTube relies very heavily on Google's search engine. So Google or YouTube is owned by Google. So this other, one of these laws would actually make it so that either Google has to not prioritize YouTube in the Google search engine over other competitors, or Google would have to disassociate itself from YouTube entirely. So basically, just YouTube would have to become a separate company. That one, I think is interesting.
Read it one more time.
So it would make it illegal for one dominant company to own another business that relies on that dominant company. So yeah. So basically, and at the same time, for them to like prohibit them from prioritizing their I want to say subserving, their other
service.
business, over competitors too. So basically this would prohibit Google from prioritizing YouTube over, I guess, Rumble is a competitor, right? Rumble or Locals,
Yeah.
I think, Twitch maybe. So if people are searching for things in the Google search engine, right now YouTube videos come up pretty highly on search, and that's very valuable. So yes, this would prevent that from happening.
Interesting. Because I'm thinking like does like the App Store for Apple, does like, say if there's an app that Apple owns, then that's kind of what I'm thinking, because if that app, for instance, that app company is wholly dependent on Apple. If Apple kicks them out the App Store, they make no money. So if that's the case, then Apple can't own that company because they have to use Apple stuff.
And same thing with Google and Google Maps.
Google Maps, if they're two separate companies,
and
the web service.
Yes. Probably. So
Amazon Web Services. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You're saying something?
Oh, no. Go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is because it would actually work in reverse. Amazon, the site, uses Amazon Web Services, so Amazon wouldn't be able to own. Well, Amazon Web Services wouldn't be able to be, or they couldn't have that relationship because the Amazon website is wholly dependent on Amazon Web Services.
Or at least they wouldn't be able to prioritize Amazon, the website, over other websites that would otherwise try to compete with Amazon.
Interesting.
So it's it is interesting, and I've heard some of the and then there's one more that would prohibit a dominant company from excluding rivals from its platform. So for example, that sounds like the Epic Games versus Apple lawsuit, where the iOS store prohibits other other app stores from existing on its platform. So and that's been pretty much like the heart of that lawsuit by Epic Games versus Apple and versus Google, actually, for that matter. So that would basically be a huge win for a company like Epic Games. So obviously there's going to be a ton of pushback on all of these. And there's already been some criticism of these, and some consumers may or may not be happy with some of these also, because some people like seeing Amazon Basics products being listed first, because they trust those. They know that those are generally speaking going to be trusted products, as opposed to other random things that might come from sellers that are not I don't know, don't have enough goodwill built up in the market for consumers to really be able to trust them. But I find it really interesting. And there's a very powerful lobbying group in DC, I think, for these antitrust, or for these tech companies. So it'll be.
Oh yeah, money's going to be exchanged. That's what's going to happen, because it's legal. Lobbying is legal bribery. Somebody's campaigns, in 2 years, people are going to want, the Republicans want to get the Senate back. The people are going to want to be running for president. Bills, it takes a long time for bills to get in. Right now, you got a 50-50 Senate. Money's going to be changing hands. People are going to be like, hey, you want Facebook to help you win your next election,
It'll definitely be super interesting to see what happens with this. But it's promising that it looks like there's bipartisan support for it, and at least Congress is actually kind of working together on something.
Well, I hope it doesn't turn into a shakedown. And what I mean by that is like, everybody kind of gets together with this bipartisan. We're going to pass this bill bipartisan. And then all that money flows in, don't pass the bill. Then all of a sudden, one side is like, all right, we're not going to pay, this is just too much. We reconsidered, because right now it's that close, what I'm saying? So you don't got to get everybody. You just got to get one side. So
that's true.
I don't know.
That's true too. Yeah.
But Facebook got the money to pay, and Apple, they all got the money to pay. So
of course they absolutely do. So, but that'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna keep my eye on that one, That's going to be, and it's under antitrust too, so it's going to be so it's a different animal than Section 230.
Yes.
Antitrust is about
So, but it's the same sort of actors. So it's kind of like a different. And also, I mean, this is ultimately both would be coming for consumers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
not coming for consumers, but they're supposed to benefit consumers, of these businesses, the users, the consumers, et cetera, whatever you want to call them. Because antitrust is the whole purpose of antitrust law is to promote competition to benefit the consumer. At the end of the day, it of course it benefits other businesses that are competing, but that's not really the ultimate goal of antitrust law. And then the same thing with Section 230. I mean, it's ultimately to benefit. Well, that one I guess is less obvious because you can say that it is to benefit the users, right? People that want the internet to exist, people that want there to be some sort of consistency in the ways that the internet is regarded by the law, because we all want to be able to use the law or use the internet, but at the same time, I think that the biggest benefit of Section 230 is probably for the internet providers and social media platforms and whatnot. I think that's become pretty clear. But I think ultimately, the purpose of Section 230 when it was passed, I understand it was a good law when it was passed. I think personally, I think it was a good law because it was, the internet was in its infancy. It really needed to have that space in order to grow, in order for that technology to develop and to really, touch, reach across the United States, reach around the world. And now it's done that, but now it's an incredibly strong beast. And so I still personally think that Section 230 should be looked at and maybe amended in some respect, not taken away entirely. I know we've talked about that before.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out because I always think Section without Section 230, there's no Rumble's gone. Rumble's destroyed, right? Rumble, what's the other one? Parler. All those places go away without Section 230. So
yeah,
Section 230 protects the small ones that we like just as much as the bad ones we don't. But it's this weird quandary between how far is free speech do you want to go and how far do you not want to go? Because you can. It's really the restrictions on YouTube are really about the advertisers, right? Advertiser friendly. If you're going to make money or not with the green arrow. I mean, the green dollar sign.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding it from that perspective, it's going to be difficult because even if you do kill Section 230, I think the issue that you come up with at the end of the day is that advertising. That's what it's going to be. Do people want to are you still going to get the same advertising dollars with the with the system that allows more raunch to it?
Yeah.
And or do you just charge everybody the same amount of money? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean that is a big reality that those have to deal with for sure is the advertising. But yeah, interesting stuff.
It's funny because I always felt like I know there's a lot of hate for Section 230, I know, but I think people don't understand how valuable it is for the internet providers. So it's just an invaluable tool. But I do think, what do you? Because I hear everybody talking about reform it, and I've been thinking about, well, how do you reform it? I know like Robert Barnes, he says, well, make them follow the First Amendment, just like a government official. But there were the civil rights cases that says you can't do that. Remember the civil rights? Now, for those of you who don't know, there was civil rights cases in right after the Civil War, and they more or less barred this racial discrimination across the board. But the Supreme Court said that the Constitution doesn't allow the government to use it as a tool to infringe on they had the right to discriminate, and the Constitution didn't give them that. It doesn't apply to the prohibition of the Constitution only applied to state actors. So things like the freedom of speech, right? The government can't deny your freedom of speech, but me as an individual can, right? If you come to my private property, I can say you can get out. You don't have the right to say what you want in my property, but on government land you do, and that's what the proposition of that case was. Is you had to be a state actor. So in this case, if you say, well, they have to adhere to the First Amendment, then you would essentially be forcing them to follow. You'd be forcing them to follow the Constitution as if they were state actors. So I don't know if the jurisprudence now is clear that you're allowed to do that, especially with the civil rights cases of 1874, right after the Civil War, because it made that explicitly clear that you can't force private entities, the Constitution. You can't force them to adhere to the prohibition of the Constitution. And in 1874, it was motels, for instance, instead of Facebook. They said motels can discriminate with Facebook. And the way they got around that, because obviously you have the civil rights of 1960s, was through interstate commerce.
Yeah. So
they were saying, well, because people travel in interstate commerce and they have to stay in particular hotels and stuff, then no hotel can discriminate based on the interstate commerce clause because we're regulating commerce. When the civil rights amendments, they were just saying we're regulating personal preference. You can't discriminate.
Which, I mean, the same could be said about social media companies. That they are impacted, or they do impact interstate commerce as well. I mean, because we're talking about, these companies, obviously they're typically headquartered in California. They don't just exist in California, and they're selling, advertising, to all kinds of companies around the nation and around the world. So I think an argument could probably be made for that as well. And Holmes is trying to enter the chat. He's being super vocal right now. But I think there's, oh gosh, what else was I going to say? There was something else that you were saying that was triggering a thought of mine.
I forget.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm hoping you guys aren't hearing it sounds like we're in downtown Baghdad at the height of the war, because people are popping off fireworks back here. So it's like pop, 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 pop. I'm like, it's not gunshots. It's just fireworks.
No, I couldn't hear anything, at least. But I'm sure you could hear Holmes trying to use his voice in the marketplace of ideas.
First Amendment cat.
He is a very big proponent of the First Amendment. Anywho, I think he just wants to get out of my office, to be honest. What was I going to say? Oh yeah. So how would I reform it? I think that, I think it is. So when it comes to the rights that these companies have, you can, what? Give me 1 second. Sorry. 1 second. Let
me see who's in the chat.
Hey, Kat. Okay.
That is. She came over from Twitter. The war. That is now he's been on the Twitter wars with us all day today. Christina, what's going on? Dan asks, what do you think the data Facebook collects is our data? It is information that they can collect. Fair point. Does the cat agree or disagree? I don't speak cat.
I speak some cat. I think he definitely. I'm not sure in this instance. But what I was going to say is that so I think so when it comes to Section 230, the rights that these companies have under Section 230, those aren't inherent under the law, right? Like they were given those rights by Section 230. So I think that where the government has given them a right, the government can also take away a right or put certain limitations on that right. So I think that it is possible, I think, for the government. I think there is a legal ability for the government to put restrictions on there, to give people First Amendment rights, for example. I personally don't think that that would be a good or at least I don't think that would solve the problem entirely by just saying, First Amendment rights are now rights, that you can have under Section 230. That you can enforce your rights against a social media company under Section 230. What I think is probably maybe a better route is to introduce some form of due process under Section 230, because already, the language of Section 230, it wouldn't take too much to reform it, actually, because already the language of Section 230 says that these actions by social media companies, I mean, they say internet providers or internet service providers, that those actions that they take to moderate the content have to be done in good faith, because those are the kind of actions that are given immunity from liability, are actions taken in good faith. And that's something that is, I think, sometimes lost from the conversation, because I think that while these companies, can say or just assume that they're taking their actions in good faith, they will say that. We don't really have much of a way of knowing whether those acts are in good faith or not, and especially if there's no process that's outlined to know. How do we know when it's in good faith? So if we were just to put in a process, and we could give limitations too on the size of the company in question, of the service provider. If it's Twitter versus Parler, they have different means of moderating content. So they have more, different numbers of people that are on these platforms. Different, they have different pocketbooks, essentially, to be able to put various processes in place. So you could have a distinction between market share, et cetera. But I think that introducing some form of due process so that people can say, like, okay, well, I'm having this issue with Facebook, or I'm having this issue with Twitter. They've just banned me for nothing, seemingly. And I have no way of being able to protest that, because who do I protest that to? The people that just banned me, and they're not giving me any reason. Twitch is one of the biggest, I guess, like one of the worst ones, really, that I personally think Twitch is one of the worst ones in this regard, that they have repeatedly banned people from their platform for seemingly nothing, and given absolutely no reasoning whatsoever. Yeah. Anyway, that was kind of a long you're response.
Right. No, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think there needs to be some type of due process, but it has to be based on scale too. Yeah. Because there's just billions of people using the product, and if everybody's going to have a gripe, there's no way you're going to hear those complaints. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. It all depends. I think it really all depends. How many notifications do you think Twitter gets to take down content? Right? Like that's somebody doesn't like somebody's thing. So it's just scale. I don't know if you can scale due process in that way, especially for things like these moderations, because I think at a certain point it's got to be a give and take. I just think the rules must probably have to be a little clearer, where some third party can objectively say, well, this person did X or Y, or just say this, or you have to kind of be preemptive with it. But you definitely, because they're still going to have the flexibility to deal with something new, because like one point in time, doing one thing was good, then all of a sudden it changes to be bad, and now you can't ban it. So I don't know. It's a lot more nuanced than I've always thought about it. But I think you're on the right track with the due process argument. I think due process is definitely something that is necessary, that we need. But just how to, it's just a practical matter of actually rolling it out in a meaningful way. That's what I think the issue is going to be. Yeah.
No, I definitely agree.
You know what? I wanted to ask you about the new federal holiday that's come out. That they just passed for. Yeah. So everyone that doesn't know, it was passed unanimously in the Senate and it was like only 14 no votes in the House of Representatives to
Are
make
you?
Juneteenth
Oh yeah,
a
I was
federal
gonna
holiday.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
So
cool. So it's actually it's officially a federal holiday, but it's not a national, right? It's not exactly
it's
a
going to be a national
national.
holiday. It's going to be the first new federal national holiday since Martin
Nice.
Luther King Day. So we're gonna so you're gonna get Juneteenth off.
That's
Yeah,
awesome. That is
to commemorate the freeing of the slaves. It's long
that's
overdue
awesome.
though.
I
Yeah,
think I think so too. I think so too. I think having and I'm sure that there's bound to be some sort of criticism of that that people will try to have a I guess sort of a I guess what is it called, like a Pyrrhic victory, where it's like a symbolic victory, but it doesn't actually necessarily change some of the problems that do exist
mm-hmm.
right now when it comes to protests by Black Lives Matter, the things that are coming up in those subjects. But I think ultimately there's absolutely no harm in recognizing a part of our history that is, I mean, that's a good day. the
Yeah,
freedom of all people from enslavement, freedom of Black people from slavery. That's a good day to recognize. So I think
yeah,
absolutely having a holiday for that is fantastic. I think it's great. I think it's great.
yeah. I think at the end of the day, we all like right now I think the country's in a good place where we're talking about things, but unfortunately, politics ruins everything. It's getting to the point where we can't have reasonable conversations about things in a sense of without calling each other names. But
Yeah.
I think this is a good step forward because again, it passed unanimously in the Senate, and 14 no votes in the House is really a miracle because you're going to get no votes for anything, except for war. It's time to go to war. No, actually, even for the war, there was one person who voted against the Iraq War. But I think I agree with everything you said, because at the end of the day, the only way we can get past this stuff is to recognize those wounds are there and move forward together. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Patch them up and move forward together. And I think right
Yeah.
now, racism has been an open wound. That's why I'm looking for this voter ID laws and everything. Everybody sees race and sees racism. And I do always love the quote from Scalia. The only way you're going to overcome racism is to stop. What did he call it? The only way you're going to stop discrimination is to stop discriminating, something like that.
Yeah, the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race.
Basis of race, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful, but it's simplistic in its thought process. But it loses the nuance of. I always like to give the example. Like my grandmother, she owned a candy store, so I remember that obviously being redlined out. So she went to go get a loan from the Small Business Administration. She would try to get a loan, and obviously, Black woman, no loan. And you crazy. We don't get Black people loans. It's only for white people. But eventually, she lived in she lived through the time where that changed, right? Where all those years she couldn't get that loan that she wanted. But then eventually, it was like, yo, that you can't do this. You got to give them open everybody. You can get the loan. So now she went back, and now they made her compete with everybody else equally who was getting those loans. So you had this group of people who were already getting the loans, who were already getting the benefit, and now they put her back in the pot with all those people who are getting the loans and getting the benefit. And at that point, the government says, well, we're going to now, since we've already given one group all this benefit forever, we're now going to make it so this group can get more benefit or to get preference for this short amount of time so they can at least meet to where the other side is. Yeah. And I think that nuance has been lost in the conversation on things like affirmative action, because that's what really we're talking about. We're talking about one side has been given all this benefit for all these years, and now instead of the other side starting off at zero, you want to then say, okay, let's give this group who we purposefully didn't give this money to, let's give them preference this time around. And I think I don't understand how that's not fair in the system. I understand that there's been a limit on that. You can't do that forever.
Yeah.
But I think you should do it for a reasonable amount of time. So, and then when things even out, everybody's on their own.
Yeah. And when it's the Supreme Court case law that's talking about affirmative action for schools, they talk about that too. How I think it was Sandra Day O'Connor that was talking about how affirmative action is good and all, but it needs to have sunset provisions. At some point we need to decide that we've had this program long enough, and that we can kind of just sort of move forward together. We can't just, have this set in stone forever until for as long as the United States exists. Which I think makes sense because, having, righting some wrongs is a good thing. And at the same time, I do also understand the sentiment that people will have saying, well, these aren't the same people that were, in the previous system, right? So during segregation, obviously, like none of, well, I don't want to say none of us existed, but you and I did not exist before, before desegregation, but I do understand the counterpoint to that there are certain I guess placements of status that people enjoy or do not enjoy because those structures in the system, existed at a certain point.
Well, it's just saying. Well, I think it's trying to stretch the timeline, but not understanding that everything is kind of built off past steps. For instance, my parents were obviously, I would say my parents were crackheads, so they didn't give me anything, right? I had to work for everything I had not a dollar. So when I went to law school, right, I was competing in law school, people from Princeton, Yale, whatever. But their track there was different, right? Their family household wealth was something like $300,000. They had houses because, the policy of redlining. They had better education. They had this, they had that. So all this was built, and that was their parents and their grandparents who got those benefits, and their parents who got those benefits. And then all of a sudden in the 80s, they changed, right? They said, well, now we're going to stop doing this and stop giving them the benefits and make the benefits open to everybody else. But we're just going to keep everybody equal. Well, now, fast forward to 2020, they've had 50 years of this benefit. I've had none of it, absolutely none of it. And so to now to say, well, it's not, the people today aren't the ones who got the benefits, the people in the past. It's like, yeah, you're giving them $1 million in the past, and then now we're at the day, and I have zero, and they got $1 million. And now you're saying, well, I can't get any benefit because it wasn't these people, wasn't that. Now, don't get me wrong. The reason why sometimes I may not be a good example of this because I actually did fight for it and got the law degree and all that stuff. But I can still also recognize that I'm an exceptional case in the sense where most people from Harlem don't get law degrees. They don't get advanced degrees. They don't even go to college, right? Most people who I try to get in law school. In my law school, even though it was a very liberal law school and it was in New York, most of the people, I was at times the only Black person in my class. It was a crazy scenario being in just a professional job. But a lot of that stuff happened because that's why the average wealth of a white household is something like $250,000 versus a Black household, which is $15,000. And I don't think that happens all in one generation. I think that takes generations to happen because like things like putting money, a lot of well, let me get my thoughts together. A lot of people build wealth through homes. I'm in the United States, so you buy a home and over 30 years, your parents now own a home that's worth more than they paid for it. So they might have bought it for 50. It's now worth 200,000, and they get passed on to the kids, and the kids now have that as a starting point to move on. Most Black families don't have that. Yeah. And that's where I think they're trying to get. And that's where they're trying to say, well, you should give them not the advantage, but just give them the preference so they can at least get to the 200,000. Right now they're at 15.
Yeah. I mean, and I do understand also the other counterpoint that there are many other people that are outside of the Black community, outside of that demographic. Yeah. There are also a lot of other people that have faced hardship through their family lines for other means, through other historical accidents. For example, I remember when I took I minored in sociology, so I took a number of classes on these kinds of topics when I was in undergrad. And I remember there was one class that was we were talking about the difference within the Asian American community. So there tends to be a socioeconomic difference between, let's say, the Korean community and the Vietnamese community. Part of that is because Koreans that come to the United States very often are coming for economic reasons, or historically have come for economic reasons, whereas Vietnamese, I mean, maybe now this might be changing, but the original reason why there was a diaspora of Vietnamese people to the United States was because they were refugees, from the Vietnam War. That's why I'm in the United States, not because of the Vietnam War, but because my mom's side, they were all refugees from World War II. They were fleeing the annexation of Lithuania by the Soviet Union. So I've seen in my own family the kind of hardships, economic and legal, that you can encounter by starting off your existence in a country like the United States, with very little power. And that was, obviously, look at me, I'm white, I might be treated in a certain respect that might be different from other people. But coming from a grandmother that spoke English, but was that was not her strongest language necessarily, and having all kinds of different hardships that come with being not just an immigrant but a refugee on top of that, having to leave behind everything.
One thing I will definitely say is that, like, a lot of people say that only Black people were redlined, and that's not true. Asians were redlined, Hispanics were redlined, and like you're saying, even Jews were redlined, right? There was a time where Jews were redlined. So you're right. The discrimination, the country's discrimination, was tragic through all these communities, and I definitely do agree that there are differences in how and how all these communities dealt with it. But I do think there are two things that because everything has a little bit more contextual basis to it. Like, for instance, you do have like things like from the 30s to about the 60s, even 70s, you then had the Jim Crow laws and the Black Code, things of that nature, that made African Americans. It's really what started the prison industrial complex, right? To take rights from these people, and it was a vestige of slavery, where you needed people to work in the fields for free. So let's say in Louisiana, when I did the case where a guy stole hedge clippers, and the guy got life in prison, hard labor, and they sent him to a plantation. That was, I think, the Black experience, and that wasn't the same experience as an Asian American. That wasn't the same, even though they did have the World War II incident, but they got reparations for that, where they put them into the internment camps. And those were only Japanese. That wasn't all Asians. But even that, I think the African American experience, I think, up until a certain point in time, if you look at the schools, you look at the education, at a point in time, it was illegal to teach a Black person to read, even after they were freed, right? Like 99% of Black people after they were freed were illiterate, right? Most of them lived in the South. So like 98% of them lived in the South, and they were second-class citizens all that time. So I think that experience is different than, let's say, an immigrant who comes to New York through Ellis Island. Who, that's why, a lot of the who also redlined, a lot of the Italians went into the food business, and you had the culture up there, and then a lot of the Irish, the paddy wagons, and went into law enforcement. And New York became a vibrant state, even just for immigrants, right? New York became the city of immigrants, right? I hate to say take it over, but they did, and a lot of the Northeast and Northwest. So I think the experiences, when you just look at kind of how these pockets have developed, I think, and then when you look at just the raw numbers, because I think it always comes down to the raw numbers. If you just look at a per capita basis, the average American wealth, you could see there was a depression for the Black community that seemed to have not been experienced, because when you take away those, the fathers by the prison industrial complex, when you don't educate them, and then and that doesn't happen to those other groups, and then when you all come together, now you're saying, well, all these other groups kind of, they did have it tough too, but I don't think they had it as tough as the Blacks in the South had it, because there were some Blacks in the North who didn't have it that bad, but the Blacks in the South, they had it bad, and we're talking about 92 or 94% of all black people in the United States were in the second-class citizen South. It was called, and for people who don't know, look up the Black Belt, and you'll see after the Civil War. And look up there were two great migrations from black people from the South. The South had actually 98% black of the black population in the United States. And during World War I, immigrants stopped coming in from Europe to build cars and to build planes. So when World War II, when World War I stopped, and they stopped immigration from Europe, they needed cheap labor. So where do you get cheap labor? People who could work for cheap, almost at slave wages. Well, you go to the South. So you had what's called the Great Migration. It was one of the largest movement of people within a country ever recorded. And you had a whole bunch of black people move to places like Detroit, Michigan, all those, the Rust Belt. Then you had the second Great Migration, which was to the Northeast. Like we're talking about cities like New York, Boston, New Jersey. And that second Great Migration was caused by World War II. Because they did the same thing, and then you had this other migration. So that's why you see in the Northeast and the North Midwest, you have very heavy black populations, and also in the South. But those two migrations were all keyed off by there just being lack of cheap labor. But one of the more interesting things about the Great Migration and what was happening in the South is that the states in the South, when that started happening, they were losing all their free labor. So they started making it illegal for people to go travel. And what you would do is you'd have to have police officers going to bus stops and train stations and stuff and arresting people who are trying to leave the state. And what they would do is arrest you, take you to the plantation, you'd work off, and then you would come out. And some of the laws were like, if you were unemployed, you was against the law, black and unemployed. This was like in 1950s. So you'd come out of jail, and you'd have police officers right there outside the jail. They'd be like, let me, where's your job? I don't have a job. Oh, you're unemployed. Arrest you again and go through the whole same process. So it was that bad.
That's crazy.
But I do want to make the argument that that's not today. Today, that's then. Today is it's night and day. Yeah. But I still think the effects of that, because we're talking about what? 50, 60, 70 years ago. We're not really talking about, we're talking about a couple of generations ago, but people lived through that time. We have people today who lived through the Jim Crow era. So it's just, I think it's really longer time to recover as a population from those horrors than, maybe one or two generations.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I do want to make it clear that I'm not saying that the other populations that have gone through discrimination and whatnot, that it's the same as the experience of, because it's like, I mean, it obviously is different because, those are people that were, I don't know. It's just, it's different because we're talking about state action by the United States versus state action by, other countries. This is why people were leaving those countries, or other circumstances. So there's an element there that makes a distinction. And there's obviously there's obviously the possibility that if someone is Jewish, they don't necessarily have to wear that on their sleeve,
That's true. Yeah.
You can walk around and nobody knows you're Jewish necessarily unless you tell people, whereas if you're white or black, you can't necessarily, I mean, unless you are of mixed literally. Background. Yeah. I mean, unless you're of mixed background and then you have a certain appearance that looks like you can blend in various, in various settings. Otherwise, it's like, it's obvious as looking at me versus looking at you.
Well, think about this. Plessy v. Ferguson, the famous Supreme Court case for separate but equal. Mm-hmm. Remember that case, Plessy v. Ferguson? Yeah. In that case, Plessy was like 1/16 black, and if you're 1/16 black, you can sit in the front. But the law was written in such a way where if you were Asian or you were from another country, just had white skin. So if you were from Europe, if you weren't an American citizen, even from Asia, you were still allowed to sit in the front of the train because your skin was a certain color. So people who weren't citizens had more right than citizens in the United States. And I think it just puts you to this perspective that even when you're talking about Asians and, look at I Love Lucy, even though she said it was hard for her to get her husband on the show, he was still on the show. That's successful. Just imagine if Desi was black in the 50s. Yeah. It wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work, you know? But I think, you know, but I think what you're saying is 100% totally correct, is that, you know, it's on our face. It's here. You can see it. It's something easy to point out. But I also think too that, you know, the other, you know, we all have suffered together, but I think we can all overcome it together too, you know? And there's no way that we're going to, that the sins of the father should impugn the sins of the son, you know, the son should not be. But I do think that if we think about it as a community and saying, well, we want everybody to have the best opportunity. And right now we know that these people were deprived of the opportunity. So let's see if we can give them a leg up. So because again, I'm not saying to make them superior. I'm saying, let's just get them to equal. And then we can, and then, let them catch up in the race, and then open the gates, and whoever, just let the strong survive. Even though I agree with Officer Tatum. I don't know if this right-wing black commentator, where he says that sometimes us in the black community are our own worst enemies, because, you know, we're so fixated sometimes looking in the past that we don't want to look into the future. And it's hard to get everybody to move to the future when they're still saying, well, listen what they did to us back then. You know, well, okay, that happened, but how do we move forward together? You know, because there's nothing that we're going to do to change that. That happened. How are we going to move forward?
Yeah. It's kind of it. I mean, it sounds like a micro or a macrocosm of, you know, an individual that went through some intense trauma in their childhood, you know, that they are then, you know, so sort of focused on that trauma for the rest of their life. And it's, you know, you can help a person out so much, you know, to overcome it, but they still have to go through certain steps to overcome that trauma as well. So it sounds kind of similar to that, but on a community-wide basis. But I mean, I feel like beyond saying that, I don't know what else. I can't really. I feel uncomfortable commenting more than that, not being part of the community.
No, it's you know what, I think that sometimes like we have to be able to have the conversation, right? Because I think all the opinions are valuable. And if you, and I know it's a difficult conversation to have, because it's even difficult for me to have, but I think there are reasonable solutions to these problems. And I think right now, like when you hear things like defund the police, that's ridiculous. You know, like of course you need police, and you don't need to defund them. It's like there was a skit that I saw on this conservative website where they had where there was like a bank robbery, and they had the police. So the police cars come in, two people came out, and they were like, "We're the crisis intervention team." You know, they got suits on. They're like, "Can we help you? You know, you have a gun." And the guy's like, "Where's the police?" He's like, "Well, we wanted to first evaluate the situation to see if you need a police. You know, they said somebody's having a tough time here, so we came as, you know, so the police to evaluate." So they took them as hostages, and then they sent the care team, and the care team was like, "Yo, we here to do some aggression here." So it's like, "What? No, we need the police. We need the police. We need the police." But what I'm saying is that I think that these conversations need to be had. Both sides need to be had out, and I think everybody can agree. You know, we nobody would know. I don't think anybody wants black people to be killed. I don't think anybody wants to be discriminatory against anyone else. But I also think we have to be honest and eventually say that, you know, this is not Jim Crow South. This is not slavery. You know, we are, you know, if you are black in America today, you're living the best, even no matter where you're at, you're living probably the best as any black person that's lived in this country than back in the Jim Crow era, right? Then back in the slavery era, right? This is, you know, and there's a lot of opportunities that are out there that I think we just don't take advantage of. And I hope that we can do it. And you know, I believe in this country. I love this country. But I also think that that we still have some a long way to go. And I'm sad about that, but I'm happy about where we've come. And I think that's the one thing that I think everybody should appreciate. We've come so far. We should be happy with where we're at.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think sometimes people lose sight of the fact that you can really love this country, love everything that we've accomplished so far, and recognize that we can still improve. Just like any any person, any
Yeah.
person. You can be proud of the things that you've accomplished and recognize, okay, I still have some goals that I have to accomplish. So
Yeah. Well, listen, I think that's it for us, right?
We've gone on a little bit.
At the end. Intense. Ah.
But it was a good discussion, though. I'm glad we got into it. I'm glad Juneteenth is becoming a federal holiday. I think that's good. I think it's a good thing, and I think this was a great discussion.
Oh yeah. And listen, and thanks for having me on. And we will be next week. Are we going? Well, I think it's my channel next week, right?
Yes, we're on your channel next week. And once again, if anybody is in the New York area, Sunday night, if you want to meet up with us in person, we are real. We are not holograms. You can find that out for real on Sunday. We'll give details probably on Twitter. Probably closer to the date and time, but Sunday evening sometime somewhere in New York in some bar.
Yes, we will be there.
So awesome.
Right.
Awesome. Yeah. So, all right. And then otherwise we'll sign off then. Have a good night, guys.